Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. Ripple CTO and co-creator of the XRP ledger itself, David Schwartz, was asked by an XRP community member if he thinks that the current price of XRP, which is around 20 cents as I record this, he's asked if that's fair and reasonable. And his response was that he generally thinks that... and I'll show you the specifics. So he actually tweeted a bunch, so you're going to get a lot of insight and into the way David Schwartz is approaching this. It's actually, from my opinion, my perspective, it's actually much more well thought out approach than you might suspect based on the surface with the initial response, especially the first sentence here. But it resulted in a bunch of flurry of activity within the XRP community and from Bitcoin Maxi trolls, not surprisingly, all up on the Twitters here. But he did respond ultimately that he thinks that generally when it comes to crypto prices today, they're generally fair and reasonable. So we're about to get into it, but before we go any further, if you would please delicately tap that like button, I'd certainly appreciate it. And also, if you value insight from David Schwartz just as much as your boy Moon Lambo does, go ahead and subscribe to the Moon Lambo channel and a show of solidarity or some such thing. We got something in common, hooray! So let's jump right into the thread now. There is a tweet that was unrelated to Ripple or XRP from David Schwartz. And this is from a little bit earlier today, just 8 hours ago. And it was to OptiWatt. I wasn't familiar with this particular Twitter account, but it's described as an account to track your Tesla spending, monitor at-home Tesla charging costs, and gas savings using your exact electricity costs. So, interesting concept, unrelated to crypto and XRP. I just thought I'd need to highlight this so that you guys understand what it is that he's writing here. And he wrote, "Hey OptiWatt, do you really think Section 8.3 of your Terms of Service is fair and reasonable?" And he has a link that goes to that. I didn't look it up because I knew I didn't really want to delve into that regardless of whether or not it's fair and reasonable on this particular channel. This is an XRP-centric channel, damn it. But XRP was brought up in this thread by Inconspicuous Link and XRP on Twitter, who wrote, "Hey David Schwartz, do you really think the 19.85 cent XRP price is fair and reasonable?" And I'm about to read his response, but as I go through this, I want you to know something at the beginning here, which is that what he's describing here as fair and reasonable, the way that I ultimately took this is to mean just how, if you just consider how all cryptocurrencies are being treated in terms of price action, you could state that it's fair and reasonable if basically your metric is tagging the price relative to what's happening, especially with Bitcoin, because it is, comes down to supply and demand. But it seems to me, and you can tell me if you think I'm right or wrong about this, but as we go through this, it seemed to me that it was based more so on that rather than, either real utility or an expectation of utility. And he actually did touch on that too, so let me just go through and we'll just kind of parse this out here. But here's what he wrote. This is David Schwartz now. "I honestly believe, crazy as it sounds, that cryptocurrency prices generally do reflect the wisdom of crowds and a fair assessment of the expected future. I am way in the minority on this view, and of course I could be well be wrong. But that's what I truly believe. My logic is simply that if the price were obviously too low or obviously too high, enough wealthy people would buy or sell to push the price into a reasonable assessment of value." Well, generally you see that in any market cycle, whether you're talking about cryptocurrencies or the stock market, but there can be longer periods of times depending on the buying cycle in which whatever you would consider to be quote unquote fair, any cryptocurrency or stock can be far outside that for a notable period of time. I mean, you could argue the rally for Bitcoin all the way up to almost $20,000 and then it tanking to the low 3,000s ultimately. Well, at some point up, if it was possible for that type of retracement, might that mean that it were clearly priced too high for a rather long period of time throughout the calendar year 2017? I think the answer is probably yes. And then David Schwartz wrote, "I think when cryptocurrency prices go down generally, for example, that reflects, in a complex, ugly way, a realistic assessment that the prospects for the cryptocurrency space generally have worsened. Now, that part I do agree with, and the reason I say that is because not enough individuals are noting the differences between cryptocurrencies. That's what I believe. And the reason I believe that is because you see XRP and every other crypto, just zoom out on a chart, following Bitcoin. So if a price for any crypto is going down, in a general sense, it's more an indictment on the crypto asset class as a whole. So that I do completely agree with that David Schwartz sentiment right there. And so somebody named 1/10 on Twitter responded to him and wrote, "So you think 19 cents is the correct value?" So he basically got the same question again, but he responded. And he wrote, "I don't want to think that, but the logic of the argument that if it was way too low or way too high, wealthy people would push the price seems pretty inescapable to me. I've expressed this view to many other people in the industry, often about other tokens are just prices generally, and they say I'm crazy and that whales can manipulate the price as they please. I'd like to believe that, but the truth is that I just don't." And I actually don't think it's that crazy of a position, but that's because I'm acknowledging that people on the whole are not really sufficiently acknowledging the differences between the cryptocurrencies and the future. And so he did state in the first tweet that, or maybe it was the second one, whatever it was, he talked about, okay, they're considering the future. I don't know how that part I'm not so sure of. When you see every single crypto being treated the same, because they're all just following Bitcoin, I start to think, no. And when I say no, I'm talking about most people. But I have cited on the channel in the past, and I do believe this as well, that there are enough people that are parsing out the differences, which is why I'm taking more of a nuanced approach to this relative to what David said, and just stating that there are enough people like me, for example, that I am heavily weighing expectations of the future adoption of XRP on what I'm doing here in terms of purchasing XRP and holding it for the long haul. And there are some people like me, and if you're listening to this channel, I suspect you're one of those people, if I just had to take a wild guess there. And I don't know that that's most people. And there are plenty of traders out there. And yes, there's whale manipulation, but it's not purely whales, or else, there would be Bitcoin leading the crypto asset class, which is what we say. But in addition to that, the top 10 cryptocurrencies would be, they would be constantly changing. And they are changing with a certain amount of frequency, but how long has XRP been in the top? How long has Ethereum been in the top? And whatever else is there? Like XLM, even that goes in and out of the top 10, but it seems to be staying around there. So I do think that there are some people parsing out the differences, but not enough people. And there's enough scaredy catness in these early days with this nascent asset class that people just don't know. And that's why everything's coupled. And that's why this was so interesting to me to come across this topic, because David Schwartz had acknowledged as much in the past. He first talked about this. I can't remember exactly when. It may have been a year and a half or 2 years ago. And he just stated that people are not really parsing out the differences between the cryptocurrencies. And he hasn't completely gone away from that. He's just adding additional information here. And the way he's wording it, when you use a word like fair, whatever people conjure up in their minds, I feel like people have a different concept of what he means when he's saying fair. And he seems to be thinking something different. He's just, because he fleshed out the concept here. He's just talking about the way that people are buying and selling based on opportunities. If something runs up real quick or something dumps real quick, that's really what he meant. When you say fair, though, a lot of people have this idea that he's talking about purely about the utility. And again, fine, he talked about the consideration for future price, but I don't see how you can conjoin that concept with the price fluctuations. I just, not in that particular way. But then he wrote, most things that seem revolutionary fail. For every the internet, in quotes he wrote, there's 100 movies in 3D. And he put that in quotes, rather, movies in 3D. And he wrote, I simultaneously believe cryptocurrency success is inevitable and acknowledge that objectively it's a long shot. Weird, huh? And that's what he wrote. To me, it does seem inevitable. And again, for me, it just, you can run business models that can't exist without it. Those businesses will have notable competitive advantages. To me, that's enough. One use case, with that being the case, yeah. And so I actually don't look at it, the crypto asset class, as a whole, as a long shot. I'm even more sure of the crypto asset class being here than I am of XRP, and I am Mr. XRP Bull, mind you. So now the thread splintered off here. And so somebody named Jimmy Quick wrote to David Schwartz, the fair assessment isn't always the actual price, unfortunately, where a fair market is not always available. David Schwartz responded, then it comes down to just how fair the market is. My argument is that the cryptocurrency market is mostly fair in this sense because it's spread over a large number of exchanges open to the majority of wealth in the world, and participation isn't artificially limited. Yeah, now that's true. Of course, it is artificially influenced with whales, but what he wrote is accurate, of course. And then David Schwartz wrote, of course, as I say this, cryptocurrencies seem to be shooting up for no particular reason, so there's that. Yeah, roller coaster ride, market cycles. And we've seen this before. When there's a frenzy around a new technology, to me, it just seems like this is to be expected. Now, XRP researcher responded and wrote, David Schwartz, do you think it's fair that projects that are not solving a real-world problem or have zero fundamentals are outperforming XRP? And David Schwartz then wrote something that's more in line with what I'd seen from him in the past. Check this out. I truly think the market isn't ready to figure out which projects will be successful and which don't and which won't, and is still trying to figure out whether cryptocurrencies are a big deal or a bad idea. Like in the early days of search engines, when some people thought search engines would be big and valuable, but nobody could have guessed whether the big winner would be Google, Excite, AltaVista, Lycos, Ask Jeeves, or any of the other dozens. Of a dozen others. If you worked at Google, then you would have told all your friends about how search is the next big thing and your company is going to be the leader. But also if you had worked at any of those other companies. So here's what's interesting here. He wrote at the first part of this was, I truly think the market isn't ready to figure out which projects will be successful and which won't. Okay? And still trying to figure out if cryptocurrencies are a big deal or a bad idea. But do you remember this tweet? Was it the first one? Yeah. So again, this is technically the second one. He wrote this in the other thread I just showed you, which seems to be at an opposing end of that. He wrote, I honestly believe, crazy as it sounds, that cryptocurrency prices generally do reflect the wisdom of crowds and a fair assessment of the expected future. So here he says it generally reflects the assessment, wisdom of the crowds. But then in this tweet that I just read, he said that the market isn't ready to figure out which projects are successful. So, which is it? I wish I could ask him. I would love for him to flesh this out, because it sounds like he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth here. And I don't mean that in some sort of insulting way. I just mean that if he means something other than the way I'm interpreting it, that's fine. I just don't know what it is. So let me go down a little bit further here. And then he wrote this, David Schwartz now. Again, these are just my personal views. They're not always what I want to believe, and sometimes my intellect and my passion for my work aren't in perfect alignment. I am rational enough to accept the possibility of failure while I work as hard and as smart as I can to succeed. And somebody named CryptoChip jumped in and wrote, having doubts in Ripple and XRP, David? With a question mark. And David Schwartz wrote, always. So the answer is yes, having doubts about Ripple and XRP. But let him explain himself here. It's not what you might think on the surface. He wrote, always. I think it's part of what keeps me on the right track. If I was always confident I was doing the right thing and believer I was certain to succeed, I might miss a necessary course correction. The idea that founders or entrepreneurs should always have complete confidence in what they're doing never resonated with me. I think you make better decisions if you are more objective, but that may just be what works best for me personally. Now that is, to me, sage wisdom, and I can speak as a business owner myself. There have been rare instances where I don't even know if there are any, where I literally say when I was making a decision that I was 100% confident. Maybe if I were highly confident, I would have said 99% or something, like if you asked me on the fly. But was I ever sure? I don't know about that. Look, I agree with David's take on that there, and I understand how people like to say things like zero doubt, like Miguel Villas. He would always say zero doubt, and I can appreciate the confidence, what he means by that. But do we literally have zero doubt? Is it impossible for anything to go wrong, to be derailed? Could so many poor decisions occur, or something catastrophic happen that that we couldn't have foreseen? Is any of that possible? And to me, you don't know what you don't know, and so I always tend to, at least not always, I tend to just leave open. Almost always, I tend to leave open the possibility that something that I could not foresee that's negative could happen. And so to me, that's completely rational, and I side with David Schwartz there. He seems to have a rather logical mind on top of being rather smart. And logic and smart's two different things, but I do think he's taken a rather measured and logical approach here. So I get what he's saying all this. Like, by and large, I actually agree with what he's saying, with the one exception there being he kind of spoke out of both sides of his mouth there. And so I would love some clarification on what he actually means. I mean, there's certainly a chance that I just misunderstood it. You tell me if I'm missing something, but I've read it multiple times even before recording this video, and I don't think so, but who knows? I'm just a simple moon Lambo. That's it for this video, though. I am not a financial advisor. Do not buy or sell anything because of anything that I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon Lambo!